Introduction. Welcome to Bitcoin Bathroom Bites, the Fiat Collapse Edition, your throne-side guide to monetary history. This book is designed to be consumed in small, digestible chunks, ideally during your most contemplative seated moments. Each chapter takes just 5 to 7 minutes to read, perfect for that brief escape to the porcelain office. No need to tackle it all at once. Simply keep it within reach and absorb one currency collapse at a time. So settle in, but not for too long. Circulation is important, and prepare to become the most financially enlightened person in your bathroom. Financial flush number 1. The ancient debasers. Ancient rulers couldn't print money, so they debased coins by mixing in cheaper metals, shaving edges, or lying about content. This ancient money printing followed a consistent pattern across diverse civilizations, from Rome to China, regardless of time or place. They all started with sound currency, diluted it during crises, then watched as societal values shifted when money lost meaning. Though technology has changed, this financial comedy of errors continues to repeat throughout history. Chapter 1. The oldest trick in the book. Why Money Always Dies. Welcome to the world's most entertaining history of financial disaster. If you're sitting down for a few minutes of quality bathroom time, prepare to learn how governments have been flushing money down the toilet long before indoor plumbing existed. Money, the universal victim. Throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen. Fashions have come and gone, and toilets have evolved from holes in the ground to heated seats that play music. But one thing has remained eerily consistent. When governments control money, they eventually destroy it. This isn't some modern phenomenon or conspiracy theory. It's the most predictable pattern in economic history. From ancient Rome to modern Venezuela, the story plays out with such clockwork precision you could set your watch to it, if your watch wasn't constantly getting more expensive due to inflation. Fun fact, over 99% of all currencies in history have eventually collapsed to zero. The average lifespan of a fiat currency, a measly 27 years. Your cat might outlive the money in your wallet. The government money playbook. Here's how the script typically unfolds. Government creates money, promising it will maintain value. Government faces pressure. War, social programs, palace renovations. Raising taxes is unpopular, so they create more money instead. Rinse and repeat until the currency resembles toilet paper, but less useful. In ancient times, rulers couldn't just press print like today. They had to physically debase coins by mixing in cheaper metals or clipping edges. Modern technology has simply made the process more efficient. What took emperors decades now happens with a few keystrokes. The inevitable collapse. When money dies, chaos follows. Savings vanish overnight. The middle class gets wiped out. People resort to barter. Try paying for Netflix with chickens. Social unrest bubbles up faster than gas after taco night. What's remarkable is how every government convinces itself this time is different. Spoiler alert, it never is. From Roman emperors to modern central bankers, the delusion remains the same. The Bitcoin difference. For the first time in history, we have an alternative. Bitcoin created something unprecedented, money that governments can't inflate away. Its supply is capped at 21 million coins. No emperor, president, or central bank can create more. It's like having gold that can't be diluted, can't be confiscated, and doesn't require a wheelbarrow to transport. In the pages that follow, we'll tour history's greatest monetary disasters, from ancient coins to modern hyperinflation nightmares. You'll learn how civilizations crumbled, not from external enemies, but from destroying their own money from within. So settle in, but not for too long. Bathroom circulation issues are real. By the time you finish this book, you'll understand why Bitcoin isn't just digital money. It's potentially the most important financial innovation since humans stopped trading seashells. Next up, the Roman Empire had the world's mightiest army but couldn't defeat their own money printer. Get ready for denarius disaster. Chapter 2. The Roman Denarius. When an empire debased itself to death. Ever wonder how the world's greatest empire collapsed? Forget barbarian hordes. The real villain was bad money. Rome conquered 3 continents but couldn't defeat inflation. The OG silver coin. The denarius was Rome's silver superstar, the currency that built the Colosseum, paid the legions and bought all those fancy togas. Introduced around 211 BCE, this shiny coin contained about 4.5 grams of almost pure silver. For nearly 200 years, it remained virtually unchanged. Fun fact, the X mark on early denarii is actually where we get the dollar symbol from today. History's in your wallet. Romans loved their denarii so much they buried vast hoards during troubling times. Archaeologists still dig up these ancient piggy banks, giving us perfect snapshots of Rome's money throughout history. Spoiler alert, those snapshots get progressively disappointing. Imperial money printer goes brrr. Running an empire is expensive. All those aqueducts, public baths, and soldiers don't come cheap. Rather than raise taxes, unpopular, or cut spending, also unpopular, emperors found a sneakier solution. They started mixing cheaper metals into the silver coins while pretending nothing changed. Emperor Nero kicked off the party around 64 CE, reducing silver content from 97% to 85%. Romans weren't thrilled, but hey, at least their coins were still mostly silver. Then came Emperor Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, each shaving off a bit more silver. By the time Emperor Caracalla took power, things got really creative. He introduced the Antoninianus, claimed it was worth 2 denarii despite containing less silver than 1. Ancient government gaslighting at its finest. The debasement accelerated into a monetary death spiral. By 270 CE, these silver coins contained less than 1% actual silver. They looked copper, felt copper, and everyone knew they were basically worthless. But the government insisted they had the same value. When money dies. The results? About what you'd expect when you destroy your money. Prices exploded 1,000% within decades. Romans stopped saving and frantically bought tangible goods. The gap between ultra-wealthy and everyday Romans became astronomical. Soldiers demanded payment in actual food and supplies instead of worthless coins. Empire-wide bartering replaced official currency. Political instability spiraled as emperors were blamed for economic chaos. The mighty Roman Empire, which had survived wars, plagues, and crazy emperors, looking at you, Caligula, couldn't survive bad money. The Western Empire fell in 476 CE, though historians still debate whether it was inflation or lead pipes that made the Romans lose their minds. Bitcoin. No emperor required. Unlike the Romans, we don't need to trust emperors with our money. Bitcoin's 21 million coin limit can't be expanded by a crazy ruler who wants to fund their personal Colosseum. Had Satoshi been around in 200 CE, perhaps we'd still be speaking Latin and wearing those fancy bedsheet togas. Instead, we can learn from Rome's mistake. When governments control money, they inevitably debase it. Next time you're contemplating the fall of civilizations while on the porcelain throne, remember, history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. And the tune it's playing sounds a lot like a money printer going brrr. Chapter 3. Byzantine Solidus. 700 years of sound money until it wasn't. What's the longest relationship you've ever maintained? A month? A year? The Byzantine Empire maintained a stable relationship with its gold coin for over 700 years. An impressive commitment in money terms. Think of it as the monetary equivalent of your grandparents' 50-year marriage, but with more sieges and fewer bingo nights. Gold, the medieval VIP pass. The solidus was the world's first truly global currency. Introduced by Emperor Constantine in 312 CEE, the same guy who made Christianity cool, this pure gold coin became so trusted that it was accepted everywhere from Viking settlements to Chinese markets. At 4.5 grams of 98% pure gold, the solidus was the Rolex of medieval money, immediately recognizable and universally respected. Arab traders called it the bezant, which literally became their word for money. When you're so good they name the concept after you, you're doing something right. Fun fact, most peasants in medieval times never saw their emperor in person, but they held his face in their hands every day on these coins, ancient celebrity endorsement at its finest. When 7 centuries of trust evaporated, for over 700 years, the Byzantine Empire kept their gold pure. Then, like that friend who maintained their fitness for decades before suddenly discovering pizza and Netflix, they let themselves go. Around the 1030s, with enemies pressing from all sides, Emperor Constantine IX, not to be confused with the original Constantine, the Byzantines weren't big on naming creativity, started secretly mixing silver and copper into the gold coins. By the 1080s, the gold content had plummeted from 24-carat purity to a sad 8 carats, a 66% reduction. Merchants weren't impressed by this medieval sleight of hand and developed bite tests to check for real gold. If your money requires dental verification, you've got problems. From world reserve to world rejected. The consequences were swift and brutal. International merchants started refusing Byzantine coins. Italian city-states created their own pure gold coins, stealing economic power. The Byzantine economy shrank faster than wool underwear in hot water. Empire lost its financial leverage long before losing territory. In a delicious twist of historical irony, the Byzantine debasement directly fueled the rise of Venice and other Italian trading powers, who later helped sack Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. Talk about monetary karma. Bitcoin, mathematically Byzantine. Unlike the solidus, Bitcoin can't be secretly debased because its code is transparent and decentralized. No emperor can decide to dilute it during a budget crisis, no matter how many digital barbarians are at the gates. Byzantine rulers learned that 700 years of trust can vanish in a single generation. With Bitcoin, trust isn't required. It's built into the math. Next up, China invented paper money and hyperinflation centuries before the West. Let's see how the world's first paper currency experiment went horribly wrong. Chapter 4, Chinese Jiaozi, Paper Promises, Worthless Results. Long before TikTok and gunpowder, China gave the world another innovation, paper money. And like many pioneering efforts, they also pioneered how to completely mess it up. Think of it as inventing both the chocolate chip cookie and the stomachache. Paper, the original financial tech disruption. During the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279, China was bustling with commerce. Merchants got tired of lugging around heavy iron coins for large transactions. Imagine buying a house with pennies, and you'll get the idea. Clever traders started using deposit receipts called jiaozi instead. Leave your coins with a merchant, get a piece of paper, trade the paper. Simple, elegant, and lightweight. The fintech disruption of its day. These notes were so revolutionary that when Marco Polo described them to Europeans, they thought he was making things up. Money made of paper. Sure, Marco. And next you'll tell us people watch cat videos for entertainment. Fun fact, early Chinese paper money carried death threats printed right on them. The notes literally warned, counterfeiters will be decapitated. Modern, legal tender statements seem positively wimpy by comparison. When the government got grabby. In 1023, the Song government had a brilliant idea. Hey, these paper notes are great. We should control this. They established a government monopoly on issuing paper money, initially backing it with actual coins. Then came the wars with northern invaders, and the government discovered something dangerous. Printing paper is much easier than mining metal. As military costs mounted, they printed more and more notes without the corresponding coin reserves. By the 1160s, these notes traded at just 10% of their face value. The government's solution? Issue new series of currency, each quickly becoming as worthless as the last. It was like trying to solve a hangover by drinking more alcohol. The world's first paper money hangover. The results were predictably disastrous. Rampant inflation destroyed savings across China. Merchants developed secret codes to mark notes with their actual value. Trade reverted to commodity money and barter in many regions. The subsequent Mongol Yuan dynasty repeated the same mistake, but bigger. The inflation was so traumatic that China abandoned paper money entirely for 500 years afterward. Imagine a technology so badly implemented that people avoid it for 5 centuries. It's like if microwave ovens had caused a nuclear disaster and nobody used them again until the year 2400. Bitcoin. Digital, not paper. China's experiment revealed paper money's fatal flaw: infinite supply. Bitcoin solves this with absolute scarcity. Only 21 million will ever exist, creating digital gold without paper promises. Next time, the mighty Ottoman Empire ruled 3 continents but couldn't manage its own silver coins. Prepare for the currency disaster that helped topple an Islamic superpower. Chapter 5. Ottoman Akçe. How to debase an empire. At its peak, the Ottoman Empire was so powerful it made European monarchs wake up in cold sweats. Controlling lands from Hungary to Yemen, the Ottomans seemed unstoppable until they encountered an enemy no army could defeat: their own monetary policy. Silver, the Islamic Empire's monetary backbone. The akçe was a small silver coin that powered the Ottoman economy for centuries. Originally containing about 90% pure silver, it was as trusted throughout the Mediterranean as Turkish coffee, but with fewer grounds. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who definitely lived up to his name, no compensation issues there, presided over the empire's golden age with high-quality silver coins that merchants accepted from Budapest to Cairo. Fun fact, Ottoman coins intentionally avoided human images due to Islamic tradition, instead featuring elaborate calligraphy. It's the monetary equivalent of having a bio but no profile pic. Little-known fact, the word cash actually comes from the Turkish akçe via Italian merchants, so when you're cashing out, you're etymologically connecting to Ottoman currency. History's in your wallet again. Silver turns to cheap metal. Sound familiar? As the empire expanded, maintaining massive armies and bureaucracy became expensive. Starting in the 1580s, the Ottomans turned to the oldest trick in the government playbook: debasement. The akçe, originally 0.73 grams of silver, shrank to just 0.13 grams by 1700, an 82% reduction. Officials worked at night to hide the debasement process, like teenagers sneaking back home after curfew. When debasement wasn't enough, they created parallel currencies in attempts to restore confidence. It's like renaming your repeatedly hacked password from password 1 to password 2 and expecting better security. From superpower to sick man of Europe. The economic fallout was devastating. Elite Janissary soldiers revolted when paid in worthless coins. Merchants across 3 continents lost faith in Ottoman trade. European rivals gained economic advantage. The empire began a multi-century decline. The inflation became so severe that Ottoman officials were eventually paid in rice and butter instead of coins. Imagine your boss trying to pay you in groceries, and you'll understand why morale might have suffered. Most shocking fact: as the akçe lost value, Ottomans developed a saying, "May you be as worthless as an akçe." This might be history's earliest example of a currency becoming a literal insult. Bitcoin. No sultan required. Like the denarius and solidus before it, the akçe proves that centralized control inevitably leads to debasement. Bitcoin removes the sultan from the equation, creating money that no empire can inflate away. Coming next, revolutionary France tried to finance liberty, equality, and fraternity with paper money. Spoiler alert, it ended with the guillotine, and not just for cake-eating aristocrats. Financial flush number 2. Revolutionary money disasters. New revolutionary governments need money fast. They can't easily tax people or borrow, so they just print lots of new money. They hope people will accept it because they believe in the revolution. When too much money is created, it becomes worthless very quickly. This helps people close to the government, but hurts regular people with fixed incomes. In the end, revolutionary leaders learn that while it's possible to overthrow a king, you can't ignore basic money rules. Changing who's in charge doesn't automatically make money stable. Chapter 6. French Assignats. Liberty, Equality, Inflation. The French Revolution gave us many things: democracy, human rights, and guillotines for the 1%. It also gave us one of history's most instructive currency disasters. Turns out, you can't fund a revolution by printing money any more than you can eat cake without having it. Revolutionary money for revolutionary times. In 1789, France was broke after funding the American Revolution, you're welcome, USA, and maintaining King Louis XVI's excessive lifestyle. When revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, they inherited empty coffers and massive debt. Their solution? The assignat, paper money backed by confiscated church lands. Initially, these revolutionary IOUs seemed brilliant. The government seized about 10% of France's land from the clergy and used it as collateral for the new currency. What could possibly go wrong? Fun fact, early assignats were beautifully designed with revolutionary symbols and elaborate anti-counterfeiting measures. People spent more time making the money look trustworthy than ensuring it actually was trustworthy. A tradition modern central banks continue. Printing for the people, and then some. The revolutionary government promised to limit printing to 400 million assignats. That resolution lasted about as long as the average New Year's diet plan. Within months, they broke their pledge. By 1793, they had printed 5 billion. By 1796, the total reached nearly 46 billion assignats. Pro tip: when a government says, "This is the absolute limit," start a stopwatch. The revolutionaries discovered what every government eventually learns. Printing money is addictively easy. No need for unpopular taxes when you can just fire up the printing press in the name of liberté. From revolutionary currency to revolutionary wallpaper. The results were catastrophic. Inflation reached 13,000% by 1796. Bread prices increased 300-fold. Citizens returned to barter or used old coins they had hidden. The government imposed price controls enforced by, you guessed it, the guillotine. In history's first recorded version of "The beatings will continue until morale improves," the government executed merchants for raising prices or refusing assignats. Turns out, threatening to behead people doesn't increase confidence in your monetary policy. At their lowest point, assignats were worth 0.5% of their face value. People literally used them as wallpaper, possibly the earliest example of money printer go brr décor. Bitcoin. Liberté without the guillotine. Unlike the assignats, which were supposedly backed by land, but ultimately backed by violence, Bitcoin is backed by mathematics. No revolutionary committee can vote to create more, regardless of how much liberté, égalité, or fraternity they promise. Coming up next, America's first currency experiment during the Revolutionary War was so spectacularly bad, it gave us the phrase "not worth a continental." Spoiler, it almost cost America its independence. Chapter 7. Continental Dollar, America's first money disaster. Before the Stars and Stripes, before the Constitution, before America was even a country, the rebellious colonies tried their hand at creating money. It went about as well as your first attempt at making sourdough during lockdown, a great learning experience, but nobody wanted the results. Revolutionary monopoly money. In 1775, the Continental Congress faced a problem. They needed to fight the world's most powerful empire, but had no tax authority. Their solution? Print paper, continental dollars backed by the promise of future tax collection, once they, actually won the war. Initially, these bills stated they could be redeemed for Spanish silver dollars, a popular currency at the time. But this was less a promise and more of a monetary vision board, since the colonies had no silver reserves to speak of. Fun fact, Benjamin Franklin designed the continental currency with innovative anti-counterfeiting techniques, including using actual leaf impressions as unique security features. The original money printer goes brr. Congress authorized $2 million in initial continental currency. By 1779, they had printed $242 million. That's a 12,000% increase in just 4 years. Impressive, even by modern money printing standards. The British, showing uncharacteristic humor, helped the inflation along by counterfeiting massive amounts of continental dollars. Psychological warfare through counterfeiting, diabolically clever in it. George Washington famously complained, "A wagon load of money will scarcely purchase a wagon load of provisions." Even the father of the country was making inflation jokes. Financial Revolution casualties. The economic damage was severe. Peak inflation reached 47,000%. No, that's not a typo. Soldiers were paid in nearly worthless paper, causing mutinies. The phrase, "not worth a continental," entered American slang for anything worthless. The new nation almost collapsed before it began. The Continental's failure traumatized early America so deeply that the Constitution explicitly forbade states from issuing paper money. The founders were essentially saying, let's never speak of this embarrassing monetary episode again. The ultimate irony, America's hard money stance eventually softened, and today the US dollar is the very fiat currency the founders warned against. It's like swearing never to become your parents, then catching yourself saying their exact phrases. Bitcoin, digital independence. Bitcoin offers what the continental dollar couldn't: money free from both governmental mismanagement and foreign interference. No British counterfeiting operations can dilute Bitcoin's value, and no desperate Congress can print more to fund a revolution. Next up, the Confederate States of America tried to finance their rebellion with unbacked paper. Spoiler alert, it went even worse than the first American Revolution's monetary experiment. Chapter 9. Russian Ruble, the Bolshevik Money Meltdown. Imperial Russia, land of czars, caviar and currency that was about to get a revolutionary makeover, and not the good kind. Before 1917, the Russian ruble was actually pretty respectable. Backed by gold and managed conservatively, It was the stable foundation of an unstable empire. But then came Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who had some, let's say, unconventional ideas about economics. From golden ruble to toilet paper. When the communists seized power, they seized the printing presses too, and boy, did they put them to work. Lenin wasn't subtle about it either. He openly declared inflation was a feature, not a bug. The way to crush the bourgeoisie is to grind them between the millstones of taxation and inflation. Grind they did. By 1921, prices had increased 16,000 times. By 1923, make that 5 million times. The hyperinflation reached a dizzying 50,000% per month, meaning your morning bread would cost double by dinner time. When money becomes mathematical notation. Soon the regime was printing money with so many zeros that people needed advanced mathematics just to buy potatoes. Workers got paid twice daily. During lunch break, they'd rush out to spend their morning wages before afternoon prices kicked in. The Soviet government's solution? Just lop off some zeros. The 1922 redenomination exchanged 10,000 old rubles for one new one. When that didn't work, they did it again in 1923, this time at a 100-to-1 ratio. It's like trying to fix a sinking ship by renaming it. The red flag of monetary collapse. The ruble's collapse had exactly the consequences Lenin wanted. The middle class was decimated, private savings vanished, and the state gained near total economic control. The population, stripped of financial independence, became more dependent on government rations. The Soviet Union eventually stabilized its currency through brutal economic centralization. The cost? Merely freedom, millions of lives, and 7 decades of economic stagnation. What a bargain! The Bitcoin escape hatch. Had Bitcoin existed in 1917, Russians, with the foresight to convert even a tiny portion of their wealth, would have preserved their financial independence. Unlike the ruble, which Lenin could inflate on a revolutionary whim, Bitcoin's 21 million supply cap means no political commissar can devalue your savings to fund their utopian dreams. Speaking of revolutionary money disasters, let's hop across the ocean to see how America's southern rebels managed to inflate themselves into defeat. Financial flush number 3. War-induced hyperinflation. War costs a lot of money. When countries are fighting for survival, they often print too much money to pay for weapons and soldiers. This causes prices to rise very fast. People suffer twice, first from the actual war, then from their savings becoming worthless. Even after wars end, prices keep going up as there's too much money but not enough goods. Countries like Germany, Hungary, Greece, and Japan all saw their money lose value after wars. These bad experiences with money can affect how entire countries think about saving and spending for many generations. Chapter 11. German Mark, the Weimar Republic Disaster. If the Confederate and Russian inflations were monetary disasters, the German hyperinflation of 1921 to 1923 was the Titanic, Hindenburg, and Chernobyl of currency collapses all rolled into one. Versailles' financial guillotine. After losing World War I, Germany faced crushing reparation payments to the Allies. Rather than raise taxes, politically suicidal, or default, diplomatically suicidal, the Weimar Republic chose door number 3, print money until the printing presses break. At first, it seemed like a clever hack. Germany could technically pay its debts while making those debts worth less through inflation. Checkmate allies. Except the only people getting checked were German citizens. When money becomes performance art. By 1923, the inflation reached levels that belong in science fiction. At its peak, prices doubled every 3.7 days. The exchange rate went from 4.2 marks per dollar in 1914 to, wait for it, 4.2 trillion marks per dollar by November 1923. Workers got paid twice daily and rushed out with wheelbarrows, not to haul goods home, but to carry enough cash to buy them. Children made kites from banknotes. One man reportedly left a wheelbarrow of money unattended. Thieves stole the wheelbarrow and dumped the cash. Society unravels when money dies. The middle class, which had patriotically invested in government bonds, was wiped out. Pensioners became paupers overnight. Anyone living on fixed incomes or savings was financially obliterated. The social fabric tore apart. Those with hard assets, factories, land, or foreign currency connections thrived, while educated professionals became destitute. This economic PTSD created fertile ground for extremist politics. A young agitator named Adolf Hitler attempted his first power grab during this chaos, the infamous Beer Hall Putsch of 1923. Germany eventually stabilized by creating an entirely new currency backed by land and industrial assets. But the psychological damage was done. Germans developed a pathological fear of inflation that persists a century later. The Bitcoin bunker. If Bitcoin had existed in the 1920s Germany, those who converted even a small portion of their marks would have escaped financial destruction. Unlike the Weimar printing presses working 24/7, Bitcoin's algorithm ensures no government can devalue it to pay debts or finance wars. As we'll see next, the Hungarian pengo was about to make the German mark's collapse look like amateur hour. Chapter 13. Greek drachma, occupation and inflation. When Nazi forces occupied Greece in 1941, they didn't just take over the country, they also hijacked the money printer. And like a teenager with parents' credit card, they went absolutely wild with it, turning fiscal policy into financial warfare. The occupiers' financial warfare. Before World War II, the Greek drachma was relatively stable. That changed dramatically on April 6, 1941, when Nazi forces invaded. Within weeks, the occupiers implemented an ingenious and horrifying economic strategy. They forced the Greek central bank to finance the entire occupation costs by, you guessed it, printing drachmas. This wasn't just opportunistic theft, it was deliberate monetary warfare. By April 1942, occupation costs had reached 113.7% of the Greek national income. Let that sink in. The Nazis were extracting more than the entire Greek economy produced, solely through forced money creation. To make matters worse, the Germans set an artificially high exchange rate of 1 Reichsmark to 60 drachmas, about 50 times the pre-war rate, allowing German soldiers to buy up Greek goods for next to nothing using this overvalued rate. This created a perfect storm, astronomical money printing combined with severe resource extraction. When wallet size mattered, more than content, the results were predictably catastrophic. By 1944, prices were doubling approximately every 4 days, with inflation reaching 13,800% monthly. The money supply increased from 23.6 billion drachmas in 1939 to 6,828 billion drachmas. By November 1944, that's 6.828 quadrillion, or nearly 290 million times more currency in circulation. The government desperately tried to keep up, printing larger and larger denominations. The pre-war 1,000 drachma note, a substantial sum then, became laughably inadequate. By late 1944, the 100 billion drachma note was in circulation and worth less than a loaf of bread. Athenians joked that you needed a suitcase of money to buy a suitcase. People received their wages in bundles and immediately sprinted to spend them. One Greek economist documented that a cash withdrawal which could buy 5 okkars, 6.4 kilograms of olive oil on withdrawal day, would buy only 2 okkars the next day, and barely 1 oka 2 days later. Back to ancient times, financially speaking. As the drachma became functionally worthless, Greece's economy regressed centuries. In Athens, the barter system predominated. Cigarettes became the most stable currency, with one pack worth about 50 billion drachmas in late 1944. Urban dwellers made weekend trips to the countryside, trading family heirlooms and furniture for food. In some regions, starvation became widespread. The Great Greek Famine of 1941 to 1944 killed an estimated 300,000 people. A tragedy compounded by the currency collapse that made food distribution nearly impossible even when supplies existed. After liberation in October 1944, the Greek government performed one of history's most severe currency redenominations, replacing the old drachma at 50 billion to 1. Even this wasn't enough. By 1946, inflation in the new drachma was running at 600%, requiring a second stabilization. The economic trauma contributed significantly to the Greek Civil War, 1946 to 1949, which claimed another 158,000 lives. The Bitcoin lifeboat. Had Bitcoin existed, it would have provided Greeks a way to preserve value outside the Nazi-controlled financial system. Unlike drachmas that could be printed at an occupier's whim, Bitcoin's decentralized nature means no invading force can hijack its monetary policy. Moreover, its digital form would have made it easier to hide from confiscation than physical valuables. Speaking of Axis powers with money problems, let's head to the Pacific, where Japan's imperial ambitions were about to create financial havoc. Chapter 15, Korean Won, the Forgotten Inflation Crisis. While the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, is often called the Forgotten War, the monetary crisis it triggered deserves its own spot in the Inflation Hall of Fame. And you thought K-pop was Korea's most explosive export. War, inflation, but not Gangnam Style. Before North Korea decided to unexpectedly drop in on its southern neighbor in June 1950, South Korea was already struggling with post-colonial monetary instability. After Japan's 1945 surrender, the Korean won had been introduced at par with the Japanese yen, but inflation was already running at about 80% annually. The surprise North Korean invasion turned that financial simmer into a full rolling boil. Within 3 months, communist forces had captured Seoul and pushed South Korean and UN forces into a tiny corner around Busan, comprising just 10% of Korean territory. The government, along with the Bank of Korea, had to evacuate their entire operation to this small perimeter. Imagine trying to run a central bank from what amounts to a financial foxhole. With most of the country occupied, tax collection became impossible. With exports halted, foreign currency reserves vanished. The South Korean government faced a war that threatened its very existence with no conventional means to pay for it. When money multiplied faster than rabbits. The financial response was predictable. Print money until the ink runs out. During the 3 years of fighting, the money supply in South Korea expanded from 15 billion won to more than 400 billion won, a staggering 2,567% increase. Prices followed suit, with inflation hitting 2,940% at its peak, meaning your morning coffee would cost nearly 30 times more by the following year. Military necessity drove this monetary madness. By 1952, over 58% of the South Korean government's expenditures went directly to national defense. With tax revenues covering less than 20% of expenditures, the difference came almost entirely from the printing press. The United Nations forces, primarily Americans, inadvertently contributed to the problem. Every dollar spent by UN troops, from buying local services to soldiers visiting bars, increased the demand for goods in an economy with collapsing production. Korean merchants often refused to accept won from UN troops, demanding dollars instead. creating a de facto dual currency system where ordinary Koreans had to use increasingly worthless won, while foreigners used valuable dollars. The foreign aid financial life support. By 1953, the cumulative inflation since 1945 had reached such extremes that the government was forced to create an entirely new currency. They replaced the won with the hwan at a rate of 100 to 1, lopping off 2 zeros in one fell swoop. Imagine waking up to discover you need to mentally divide all prices by 100 and your savings along with them. What saved South Korea from complete monetary collapse? Massive American aid, which funded approximately 70% of South Korea's imports and provided critical budget support. Between 1953 and 1961, U.S. aid to South Korea totaled $2.5 billion, nearly $25 billion in today's dollars. At its peak, foreign aid represented 16% of South Korea's GDP, economic life support for a nation whose currency had flatlined. Despite this assistance, the won continued its inflationary slide. By 1961, when General Park Chung-hee seized power in a military coup, inflation was still running at 300% annually. In 1962, his government performed yet another currency reform, introducing the new won at a rate of 10 hwan to 1 won. South Koreans had effectively endured two major currency redenominations within a decade, their monetary system hitting the reset button twice in one generation. The Bitcoin defense line. Had Bitcoin existed during the Korean War, South Koreans with the foresight to convert even a small portion of their wealth could have preserved value through both wartime chaos and post-war instability. Unlike the hwan, which could be created at will to fund military operations, Bitcoin's fixed supply would have remained impervious to wartime financial emergencies and the chaotic currency reforms that followed. The most remarkable aspect of this story: South Korea eventually transformed from an inflation-ravaged war zone into one of the world's most stable economies. By 2022, South Korean inflation averaged just 2.5% annually, a testament to how nations can learn from monetary disaster and rebuild financial credibility even from the ashes of war. Now let's travel west to Soviet Russia, where the communist dream was about to meet inflationary reality. Financial flush number 4. Socialist spending spirals. Socialist countries often have money problems. When they try to control both what gets made and how much things cost, they create big economic troubles. Instead of letting prices change naturally, these governments print more money while keeping prices fixed by law. This creates a dangerous situation where inflation builds up silently until it explodes. You don't see prices going up right away. First, stores run out of things to buy. Black markets appear, and you need special connections to get basic items. When the government finally makes changes, all the hidden inflation hits at once. These failures show an important truth: economic reality always wins in the end, no matter what politicians believe. Governments can print more money, but they can't print actual wealth. Chapter 16. Soviet Ruble. The Communist Currency Collapse. For decades, the Soviet Union claimed its planned economy was superior to Western capitalism. Then, the 1990s arrived and gave the ruble a reality check more brutal than a Siberian winter. The final communist financial flameout. By 1991, the Soviet economy was already wheezing like an 80-year-old coal miner. Decades of central planning had created a system where officially inflation did not exist. Prices were set by government decree, not market forces. The problem? When prices can't rise but money supply increases, you don't get inflation, you get shortages. Soviet citizens became masters of standing in lines. The average Moscow resident spent 30 to 40 hours monthly waiting to purchase basic necessities. The unofficial inflation measured by black market prices was running at about 150% annually by 1990, despite official statistics showing much lower rates. When the USSR finally collapsed in December 1991, Russia's new government under Boris Yeltsin decided to shock the moribund economy into capitalism virtually overnight. On January 2, 1992, they removed price controls on 90% of consumer goods and 80% of industrial inputs. Decades of suppressed inflation suddenly burst forth like champagne from a vigorously shaken bottle. When Grandma's life savings bought a loaf of bread. The results were spectacular and horrifying. During January 1992 alone, prices rose by 245%. By year's end, annual inflation had hit 2,508%. The average Russian's purchasing power collapsed by over 40% in just 12 months. To put this in perspective, if you had 10,000 rubles saved in December 1991, enough to buy a decent used car, by December 1992, that same amount would barely purchase groceries for a week. By December 1993, it might buy a loaf of bread. The government's response to this crisis: print even more money. The Russian central bank increased credits to state enterprises by 700% in 1992 alone, pouring gasoline on the inflationary fire. By 1993, the inflation accelerated to 840% annually, with some months seeing price increases of 25 to 30%. Russians developed a saying, "If you haven't bought it, you don't own it." Money became so unstable that the moment you received your salary, you converted it immediately into physical goods, anything from sugar to vodka to toilet paper, because by next week, those items would be worth more than your cash. From Marx to financial Darwinism. The social consequences were catastrophic. By 1994, real wages had fallen to about 40% of their 1991 levels. State employees like teachers, doctors, and scientists saw their monthly salaries diminish to the equivalent of $30 to $40. Pensioners who had worked their entire lives under the Soviet system found their retirement payments worth less than $20 monthly. Meanwhile, a class of opportunistic new Russians emerged, connected insiders who managed to acquire state assets for kopecks on the ruble through the controversial loans for shares privatization scheme. The rapid wealth polarization created social tensions that persist to this day. The ruble's collapse continued until July 1998, when the government defaulted on its debt and devalued the currency by 70% in a single day. Russians who had begun to trust banks again saw their savings decimated for the second time in a decade. The typical Russian family lost between 50 and 75% of their wealth during the post-Soviet transition, a financial trauma that helps explain Russia's current political dynamics. The Bitcoin safety net. Had Bitcoin existed during the post-Soviet transition, ordinary Russians could have preserved their purchasing power against both hyperinflation and the ruble's repeated collapses. Unlike the centrally controlled ruble, Bitcoin's decentralized nature means no Kremlin decree or oligarch connection can manipulate its value. Russia's monetary meltdown illustrates a crucial lesson. When a currency collapses, it's not just numbers on paper, it's lives upended, savings obliterated, and social contracts shattered. As we'll see in our next chapter, currency collapse can even accelerate the disintegration of entire nations. Chapter 19. Cuban peso, the two-currency trap. Most countries worry about their currency collapsing. Cuba managed the impressive feat of maintaining two parallel currencies for nearly 3 decades, creating a monetary system so confusing it would give even PhD economists a migraine. Revolution, isolation, and monetary schizophrenia. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Cuba lost its economic sugar daddy overnight. Soviet subsidies had kept the Cuban economy afloat for decades. Without this support, the island nation plunged into what Castro euphemistically called the special period, a time so desperate that Cubans joke they learned to cook anything that moved and several things that didn't. With the economy in freefall and tourism the only potential lifeline, Cuba made a desperate move in 1993, legalizing the US dollar. Yes, the revolutionary socialist paradise suddenly embraced the currency of its capitalist arch-enemy. Fidel must have needed a double dose of cigars that day. But allowing regular Cubans to hold dollars created an awkward problem: how to maintain the facade that the peso-based socialist economy was working while simultaneously acknowledging it wasn't. The solution was breathtakingly complex. Create a second dollar-pegged Cuban currency. The Tale of Two Pesos, CUP versus CUC. From 1994 until 2021, Cuba maintained two parallel currencies. The Cuban peso, CUP, used for rations, utilities, and state salaries, averaging about $30 per month. The convertible peso, CUC, pegged 1-to-1 to the dollar and used in the tourist economy, luxury goods, and imports. The exchange rate between them, an arbitrary 24-to-1 that bore no relationship to economic reality. This created an economic apartheid system where Cubans with access to CUCS through tourism jobs or family abroad lived vastly better than those trapped in the CUP economy. State doctors earning 1,200 CUP monthly, about $50, found themselves economically inferior to hotel doormen earning tips in CUCs. A taxi driver could earn more in one day than a surgeon made in a month. The system undermined the very socialist principles the revolution claimed to uphold. Hidden inflation through monetary manipulation. While Cuba never experienced traditional hyperinflation with skyrocketing prices, it achieved something possibly worse: hidden inflation through currency manipulation. The government consistently overvalued the CUP in official exchanges while maintaining price controls on basic necessities. The result? Chronic shortages that required Cubans to spend hours in lines for basic goods. Officially, inflation was low. Practically, the inflation manifested as empty shelves in a thriving black market where real prices were 5 to 10 times higher. This monetary sleight of hand allowed the government to claim economic stability, while citizens experienced constant scarcity. Cuban economists have a saying, "We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us." The Bitcoin workaround. In recent years, resourceful Cubans have turned to cryptocurrency to overcome both the dual currency confusion and US sanctions. Bitcoin provides what neither the CUP nor CUC could: a neutral, internationally accepted medium of exchange not controlled by either the Cuban government or its American adversary. When Cuba finally abandoned the two-currency system in January 2021, the overnight 2,400% devaluation created exactly the economic shock the complicated system had been designed to hide. Bitcoin users, meanwhile, continued transacting without disruption. Next up, we'll visit China, where Mao's economic experiments created a monetary disaster that would claim millions of lives. Chapter 20. Chinese Yuan, Communist Era, The Great Leap Backward. Chairman Mao was many things, but financially literate wasn't one of them. His monetary experiments during the early communist era and Cultural Revolution created chaos that makes our modern financial crises look like rounding errors. Revolutionary money, disastrous results. When the communists took power in 1949, China had already suffered decades of monetary madness. The previous nationalist government had achieved an impressive 1,000,000% annual inflation by 1948, with prices doubling every 20 hours at the peak. People received wages in the morning and shopped immediately before lunch, knowing afternoon prices would be higher. Mao's solution was radical: completely abolish the old currency. In 1955, the government introduced the renminbi, people's currency at a rate of 10,000 old yuan to 1 new yuan. Overnight, Chinese people had to mentally divide all prices by 10,000, a mathematical challenge that would make even a CPA sweat. For a brief period, the new currency achieved relative stability. Then came Mao's economic masterstroke, the Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962, perhaps history's most ironically named policy. The people's money during the people's famine. The Great Leap Forward aimed to transform China from an agricultural society into an industrial powerhouse overnight. Farmers were ordered to abandon food production to make steel in backyard furnaces. The predictable result? The deadliest famine in human history, claiming 30 to 45 million lives. During this catastrophe, the government continued printing money to finance industrialization while maintaining artificially low food prices. This created the most perverse form of inflation. Shelves emptied, while official prices remained stable. Villagers traded family heirlooms for cups of rice. Money became virtually meaningless when there was literally nothing to buy. The financial distortions were mind-boggling. In some regions, all financial assets, from cash to savings accounts, lost 99% of their purchasing power in just 4 years, despite official inflation statistics showing minimal changes. This hidden hyperinflation manifested as mass starvation rather than price increases, a grim reminder that economic statistics often mask human suffering. Cultural Revolution, Currency Chaos. The Cultural Revolution 1966 to 1976 brought another wave of monetary madness. Mao, suspicious of banking as a capitalist institution, ordered banks to abandon record-keeping and loan standards. In some provinces, local revolutionary committees issued their own currencies, creating a confusing patchwork reminiscent of China's warring states period. By 1976, China's economy was so distorted that the same item could cost 100 times more in one province than another. Money's basic function as a consistent measure of value had completely broken down. When Deng Xiaoping began reforms in 1978, he famously declared, "It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice." After decades of ideological monetary policy, pragmatism finally prevailed. The Bitcoin alternative. Had Bitcoin existed during China's communist-era monetary chaos, it would have provided an escape from both government-imposed scarcity and ideological economic experimentation. Unlike the yuan, which could be manipulated to serve political goals, Bitcoin's algorithm operates independently of 5-year plans and revolutionary committees. Ironically, modern China has become one of Bitcoin's most ambivalent adversaries, simultaneously banning cryptocurrency for citizens while embracing blockchain technology for the government's digital yuan. Perhaps no country better understands both the power and threat of non-state money. Next, we'll fly to South America, where Brazil managed the impressive feat of creating and destroying 5 currencies in just 8 years. Financial flush number 5. Modern monetary meltdowns. Modern money disasters still happen all the time. Brazil needed 5 different currencies in just 8 years. Zimbabwe printed bills worth $100 trillion that couldn't buy much food. What's really shocking is that these happened despite all our modern knowledge about economics and banking. Even countries rich in oil, Venezuela or farmland, Zimbabwe, destroyed their money through terrible decisions that would embarrass ancient rulers. When money fails, society changes dramatically. Middle-class families lose everything overnight. Doctors and teachers suddenly can't afford basic needs. Millions of people leave their countries. Governments often collapse along with their currencies. The scary part is how recent these disasters are. Despite our computers and economic experts, we keep making the same money mistakes that have ruined societies for thousands of years. Chapter 22, Zimbabwean Dollar, the $100 trillion Nightmare. If you've ever wanted to be a trillionaire, Zimbabwe offered the easiest path to mathematical wealth, if not actual prosperity. Their hyperinflation turned ordinary citizens into quadrillionaires who still couldn't afford a loaf of bread. From Africa's breadbasket to monetary basket case. Once called the breadbasket of Africa, Zimbabwe was a relatively prosperous nation with a stable currency at independence in 1980. The Zimbabwe dollar traded at par with the US dollar and was considered one of Africa's stronger currencies. Fast forward to 2008, and the same dollar had lost so many zeros that scientific notation became necessary to track its value. The seeds of Zimbabwe's monetary disaster were planted in 2000, when President Robert Mugabe implemented fast-track land reform, seizing white-owned commercial farms and redistributing them to politically connected individuals with little farming experience. Agricultural production collapsed almost overnight. Tobacco exports, the country's largest foreign exchange earner, fell by 64% within 3 years. As tax revenues and exports plummeted, the government faced a choice: reduce spending or print money. They chose the printing press with an enthusiasm that would make even the Weimar Republic blush. When inflation became a math problem. The resulting hyperinflation progressed from concerning to absurd to mathematically surreal. 2000. 55% annual inflation already worrying. 2003. 600% serious problem. 2006. 1,300% economic emergency. 2007. 66,000% monetary disaster. 2008. Peak. 89.76 trillion%, 79,600 billion%. At its worst, in November 2008, prices doubled every 24.7 hours. Economists had to develop specialized formulas just to calculate the rates, as standard financial tools weren't designed for numbers this large. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe became the world's most prolific currency designer, removing zeros from the currency 3 times. August 2006, 1 new dollar equals 1,000 old dollars, 3 zeros. August 2008, 1 new dollar equals 10 billion old dollars, 10 zeros. February 2009, 1 new dollar equals 1 trillion old dollars, minus 12 zeros. In total, 25 zeros were removed from the currency in less than 3 years. Without these redenominations, that famous $100 trillion note would actually have been a $10 septillion note. 10,000 trillion. Living in trillion-dollar poverty. Daily life became a financial obstacle course. Bank withdrawal limits were trillions of dollars, but might only buy 3 eggs. ATMs couldn't display enough digits for necessary withdrawals. Restaurants stopped printing menus. Servers simply informed you of the price when you ordered, knowing it would increase by the time you finished eating. Workers negotiated daily wage adjustments. Companies paid employees multiple times per day, with designated runners who took the money directly to markets to buy goods before further devaluation. Bus fares could double between your morning and evening commute. By December 2008, the $100 trillion note, the highest denomination banknote ever issued, could buy just 3 eggs. Prices in stores were often quoted in octillions of dollars. Most Zimbabweans abandoned mathematics altogether and switched to barter or foreign currencies. The human impact was devastating. Life expectancy dropped from 61 to 43 years between 1990 and 2008. Unemployment reached 80%. Approximately 25% of the population fled the country, creating one of Africa's largest diasporas. The currency that died. In April 2009, the government finally surrendered, abandoning the Zimbabwean dollar entirely and legalizing the use of foreign currencies. The economy immediately dollarized, with US dollars, South African rand, and Botswana pula, becoming the primary means of exchange. When the central bank offered to redeem Zimbabwean dollars in 2015, they provided a rate of 35 quadrillion local dollars to $1 US. For $175 quadrillion, more than existed in circulation, you could receive $5. Most people didn't bother redeeming their Zimbabwe dollars. Ironically, they're now worth more as novelty items on eBay than as actual currency. The Bitcoin Lifeboat. Had Bitcoin existed during Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, it would have provided citizens a way to preserve value without relying on physical US dollars, which were often confiscated at roadblocks. Today, Zimbabwe has one of Africa's highest rates of cryptocurrency adoption. A population once burned by monetary collapse recognizes the value of currency outside government control. Next, we'll travel to Venezuela, where socialist policies turned the world's largest oil reserves into the Western Hemisphere's worst currency disaster. Chapter 23. Venezuelan Bolivar. Oil wealth to monetary ruin. Imagine having the world's largest oil reserves and still managing to create the hemisphere's worst currency collapse. Venezuela didn't need to imagine, they lived it, transforming from Latin America's wealthiest nation to a case study in petroleum-powered hyperinflation. How to squander a century of oil wealth. Venezuela's monetary disaster began, like many others, with good intentions paved with fiscal irresponsibility. When Hugo Chavez became president in 1999, oil prices were below $20 per barrel. By 2008, they'd soared above $140, flooding Venezuela with petrodollars. Instead of saving this windfall, Chavez's government spent lavishly on social programs, subsidies, and foreign aid. When oil prices inevitably declined, rather than cutting expenditures, they turned to the central bank. Between 2000 and 2018, the money supply increased by a mind-boggling 27 million%. Initially, strict currency controls masked the inflation problem. The government maintained an official exchange rate of 10 bolivars per dollar, while the black market rate steadily diverged. By 2014, the official rate was 6.3 bolivars per dollar, while the unofficial rate exceeded 100, creating a financial parallel universe where your money's value depended entirely on government connections. From inflation to hyperinflation to mathematical absurdity. When oil prices collapsed in 2014, the government's fiscal house of cards came tumbling down. Inflation, already high at 69% in 2014, accelerated to 255% in 2016, 1,087% in 2017, and an almost incomprehensible 130,060% in 2018. By 2019, inflation reached approximately 1,700,000% annually. For perspective, that means something costing 1 bolivar in January would cost 17,000 bolivars by December. The government, led by Chavez's successor Nicolás Maduro, responded with denial, blaming economic warfare by the foreign powers rather than their own monetary policy. As the bolivar collapsed, the government engaged in a surreal numbers game with their currency. March 2018, the Bolivar Soberano replaced the Bolivar Fuerte at 1,000 to 1. October 2021, the Bolivar Digital replaced the Bolivar Soberano at 1 million to 1. In total, 14 zeros were eliminated from the currency in just 3 years, meaning one 2021 bolivar would have been written as 100 billion pre-2018 bolivars. When your currency needs 14 zeros removed just to be usable, you know you've achieved monetary catastrophe. Daily life in a petro-state paradox. Venezuela created perhaps the most bewildering contrast in economic history. A nation with more oil than Saudi Arabia, where citizens couldn't afford toilet paper. Daily life became a financial obstacle course. Workers received salary adjustments multiple times monthly, but wages still lost value faster than they increased. By 2018, the monthly minimum wage could buy about £2 of beef if you could find it. Banks limited daily withdrawals to amounts that wouldn't cover a bus ride. ATMs offered a maximum of 10,000 believers, about 5 cents per transaction. The worthlessness of cash created bizarre situations. Venezuela's largest banknote, the 100,000 believer bill, was worth about 50 cents in early 2018, making petty theft unprofitable. Criminals literally wouldn't steal your wallet because the cash was worth less than the wallet itself. Shopkeepers weighed stacks of cash rather than counting bills, selling products by the kilogram of currency. Basic financial activities became impossible. Buying a car would require literal truckloads of cash. Restaurants needed to update prices so frequently that some simply priced menu items in US dollars illegally. Others used a point system updated daily based on the black market exchange rate. Perhaps most ironically, hyperinflation made Venezuela, an oil superpower, suffer chronic fuel shortages. With gasoline prices fixed at absurdly low levels, approximately 1 cent per tank in 2018, smugglers bought Venezuelan gasoline and resold it in neighboring Colombia at market rates, making 20,000% profit. The Crypto Revolution. Venezuela created the world's first crisis-driven cryptocurrency adoption wave. By 2019, an estimated 10% of the population was using cryptocurrencies to preserve purchasing power, remit money abroad, and conduct basic transactions. The government, recognizing this trend, attempted to co-opt it by launching the Petro, supposedly backed by oil reserves, but widely considered a scam. Meanwhile, ordinary Venezuelans turned to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in significant numbers. Bitcoin mining became particularly popular as Venezuela maintained artificially low electricity prices, as low as 1 cent per kilowatt hour. Mining operations that would be unprofitable elsewhere generated significant income in Venezuela, despite periodic government crackdowns and confiscation of mining equipment. Had Bitcoin been more widely adopted earlier, millions of Venezuelans might have preserved their savings through the Bolivar's collapse. Unlike the government-controlled Bolivar, Bitcoin's decentralized nature means no presidential decree can devalue it overnight. As we'll see next, Argentina, which shares many of Venezuela's natural resources, has been suffering recurring currency crises for decades, earning the title, The Country That Never Learns. Chapter 24, Argentine Peso, the country that never learns. If currency collapses were Olympic events, Argentina would have a trophy case full of gold medals. No other modern economy has managed to default on its sovereign debt 9 times while creating a new financial crisis approximately every decade. Argentina isn't just familiar with economic disaster, they're practically in a committed relationship. The recurring monetary nightmare. Argentina's history of financial instability dates back to the 19th century, but let's focus on their modern monetary misadventures. Since 1969, Argentina has introduced 5 different currencies, lopping off a total of 13 zeros. Peso ley, 1970 a 1983. Peso argentino, 1983 a 1985. Un peso argentino igual a 10.000 pesos ley. Austral 1985 a 1991. 1 austral igual a 1.000 pesos argentinos. Peso convertible 1991 a 2002. Un peso convertible igual a 10.000 australes. Peso 2002 to present. That's the equivalent of dividing the original 1,970 peso by 100 trillion. Let that sink in. Without these redenominations, prices today would need 13 extra zeros. Your morning coffee would cost trillions. The most infamous episode in this saga came in 1989, when hyperinflation reached an eye-watering 3,000% annually. Prices rose so quickly that supermarkets stopped labeling items. Instead, employees read prices from a constantly updated master list at checkout. Customers would hear the price, run to a bank to withdraw more money, and return to complete their purchase, sometimes finding the price had increased again in the interim. The convertibility mirage. In 1991, Economy Minister Domingo Cavallo introduced the convertibility plan, pegging the new peso 1-to-1 with the US dollar. This drastic measure initially worked brilliantly. Inflation plummeted from 84% in 1991 to 7.4% in 1993, eventually reaching just 0.1% in 1996. For a glorious decade, Argentines enjoyed previously unimaginable monetary stability. Middle-class families took dollar-denominated mortgages and vacationed abroad. The economy grew at an average of 6% annually between 1991 and 1998. The international community hailed Argentina as a poster child for economic reform. The honeymoon couldn't last. By pegging to the dollar while running persistent budget deficits, Argentina backed itself into a corner. When Brazil, their largest trading partner, devalued its currency in 1999, Argentina's exports became uncompetitive. The economy stalled, tax revenues fell, and debt skyrocketed to 57% of GDP by 2001. El Corralito. When banks become prisons for money. In December 2001, as bank runs accelerated, the government implemented El Corralito, the Little Corral, freezing all bank accounts and allowing withdrawals of just 250 pesos, $250 weekly. Imagine needing your money for Christmas shopping or medical emergencies only to find your life savings imprisoned behind bank counters. The ensuing protests turned violent. President de la Rua fled the presidential palace by helicopter. Argentina cycled through 5 presidents in 2 weeks. On January 6, 2002, the new government abandoned the dollar peg, and the peso promptly lost 70% of its value. Overnight, dollar-denominated debts became unpayable. Savings accounts were forcibly converted to pesos at the old rate, while the currency devalued at the new rate, effectively confiscating 70% of depositors' purchasing power. The human cost was staggering. Unemployment soared to 25%, and poverty engulfed 57% of the population. Middle-class families found themselves digging through garbage for food. Formerly prosperous professionals began driving taxis or selling homemade empanadas to survive. The never-ending crisis. Unlike most countries in this book, Argentina never fully recovered from its 2001 collapse. Instead, they created a perpetual state of financial dysfunction. 2008. Government seizes private pension funds to pay debts. 2011. Capital controls reintroduced. Cepo Cambiario. 2014. Technical default on restructured debt. 2018. Currency crisis with 47% annual inflation. 2019. Return of capital controls and partial debt default. 2022. Inflation exceeds 100% annually. 9th sovereign default. The peso's persistent weakness created a bizarre multi-tiered exchange system with at least 5 different dollar exchange rates. The official rate, blue dollar, black market, MEP dollar, Netflix dollar, and soy dollar, each with different values and specific purposes. Argentines adapted with remarkable creativity. An estimated 70% of the population hold some savings in US dollars, typically in cash hidden at home. The slang term colchon bank, mattress bank, entered everyday language. Financial advisors don't ask, how much do you save? But rather, where do you keep your dollars? The Bitcoin way out. Argentina has become one of Latin America's cryptocurrency adoption leaders, with an estimated 12% of the population owning some crypto assets by 2022. Bitcoin provides what 9 versions of the peso couldn't: a store of value independent of government mismanagement and a hedge against the next inevitable crisis. For Argentines who bought Bitcoin even as recently as 2014, their purchasing power has increased dramatically compared to peso-denominated savings, which lost over 99% of their value in the same period. When your country has defaulted 9 times in its history, Bitcoin's volatility actually looks like stability in comparison. As we head east across the Mediterranean, we'll see how Lebanon, once called the Switzerland of the Middle East, managed to destroy one of the region's most trusted currencies in record time. Financial flush number 6. The coming crisis? Are today's stable currencies headed for trouble too? The warning signs look familiar: governments borrowing too much money, central banks creating trillions in new currency, and the US dollar losing over 96% of its value over time. Currency problems aren't just history. They're happening right now in places like Turkey and Nigeria, following the same old patterns. Bitcoin might offer something different because it has fixed rules instead of human managers making decisions. This could possibly break the cycle of money losing value that has happened over and over throughout history across different civilizations and continents. Chapter 26. Turkish Lira, a currency in free fall. Turkey's currency crisis stands out from others in this book for one crucial reason: it was entirely self-inflicted. While most governments destroy their currencies accidentally through incompetence, Turkey's leadership deliberately tanked the lira based on an economic theory so bizarre it makes astrology look scientific. The lira's long decline. The Turkish lira's troubles date back decades. Chronic inflation forced a massive redenomination in 2005 when 6 zeros were removed from the currency. The new Turkish lira, YTL, converted at 1 million to 1, meaning 1 new lira equaled 1 million old lira. This reset briefly restored credibility, with the new coins and notes projecting an image of modern economic management. For a while, it worked. Under then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey enjoyed an economic renaissance. Between 2002 and 2013, GDP more than tripled from $238 billion to $950 billion. Per capita income jumped from $3,600 to $12,500. Foreign investment poured in. Istanbul's skyline transformed with gleaming skyscrapers. Turkey joined the G20 and began EU membership negotiations. The lira, while never rock solid, maintained relative stability at around 1.5 to 2.0 to the US dollar. Turkey was widely hailed as an economic success story, a model of how a Muslim-majority country could blend moderate Islamism with free market capitalism. Professor Erdogan's unconventional economics. Things began unraveling in the mid-2000s as Erdogan consolidated power and gradually abandoned economic orthodoxy. After a failed coup attempt in 2016, he purged the central bank and finance ministry of independent voices, replacing them with loyalists. By 2018, Erdogan had embraced a truly bizarre economic theory that contradicted fundamental principles accepted by virtually all economists across the political spectrum. He repeatedly claimed that high interest rates cause inflation rather than help control it, a position so economically backward it's like claiming antibiotics cause infections. More troublingly, he began directly controlling monetary policy, forcing the central bank to repeatedly cut interest rates, despite soaring inflation. 2018, fired central bank governor for refusing to cut rates. 2019, fired another governor after just 4 months. 2021, fired a third governor who had raised rates to fight inflation. Between 2018 and 2022, Turkey cycled through 4 central bank governors, a rate of turnover typically seen in failed states, not G20 economies. Each dismissal came after the governor attempted to raise interest rates to combat inflation. Meanwhile, Erdogan proudly declared himself an enemy of interest rates, claiming his approach was based on Islamic principles against usury. The mathematical results of monetary madness. The market's verdict on Erdoganomics was swift and brutal. The lira's collapse accelerated with each interest rate cut. 2018, 7.4 lira per dollar, 40% annual depreciation. 2020, 8.5 lira per dollar, 15% depreciation. 2021, 18.0 lira per dollar, 112% depreciation. 2022, 18.6 lira per dollar, 44% inflation. 2023, 28 lira per dollar, 65% inflation. Overall, between 2018 and 2023, the lira lost 73% of its value against the dollar. Inflation officially peaked at 85.5% in October 2022, though independent economists at Enna Group calculated the true rate at 176%, suggesting government figures were heavily manipulated. The economic consequences were devastating. Turkey's per capita income in dollar terms fell from $12,500 in 2013 to $8,150 by 2023, effectively erasing a decade of progress. Minimum wage earners saw their monthly income drop from $380 to $220 in dollar terms despite nominal increases. Foreign investment fled, with net outflows of $10 billion in 2022 alone. Daily life under runaway inflation. Ordinary Turks developed creative coping mechanisms. Dollarization became widespread, with an estimated 70% of all savings held in foreign currency by 2022. Real estate listings, even for modest apartments, switched to euros or dollars. Electronics stores updated prices daily based on the latest exchange rates. The inflation created particularly cruel impacts for the elderly and professionals with fixed incomes. Turkish doctors, once middle-class professionals, saw their public sector salaries fall to the equivalent of $500 monthly, less than what Turkish physicians earned in the 1990s. An estimated 10,000 doctors emigrated between 2019 and 2023, creating a healthcare brain drain during the COVID pandemic. Food inflation hit hardest. Basic items saw staggering price increases. Tea, 123% increase, 2022. Bread, 155% increase, 2022. Sunflower oil, 175% increase, 2022. Eggs, 189% increase, 2022. Government responses verged on tragic comedy. When onion prices soared 400%, the government blamed onion speculators and conducted raids on warehouses. When meat became unaffordable, state-subsidized meat shops appeared with huge queues. Officials repeatedly blamed mysterious foreign powers for the inflation, never their own policies. The Bitcoin defense. While the government restricted cryptocurrency in 2021, banning its use for payments, Turks became among the world's most enthusiastic crypto adopters. By 2022, an estimated 8 million Turks, nearly 10% of the population, owned cryptocurrency, among the highest adoption rates globally. Bitcoin provided what the lira couldn't: protection from Erdogan's monetary experiments. While government policy could devalue the lira overnight through interest rate cuts, Bitcoin remained outside political control. For Turks who converted lira to Bitcoin in early 2020, their purchasing power remained largely intact despite the currency's collapse. Next, we'll examine Nigeria, where a perfect storm of currency redesign, oil sector troubles, and capital controls created Africa's newest monetary crisis. Chapter 28. Global Reserve Currencies Rise and Fall. Imagine you're watching Game of Thrones but with currencies instead of noble houses. Over centuries, powerful currencies rise to dominance, enjoy decades or centuries of glory, then gradually fade away. The Iron Throne of international finance has changed hands repeatedly, and each transition period created massive global disruption. The parade of monetary powers. For a currency to achieve reserve status, other countries must be willing to hold it as foreign exchange reserves, use it for international trade, and denominate contracts in it. This status doesn't just happen. It requires military power, economic heft, financial sophistication, and political stability. Throughout history, reserve currency status has followed a predictable pattern, shifting alongside global power dynamics. 1,450 to 1,530 Portuguese real. As pioneers of the age of exploration, Portugal's currency became important for Asian spice trade and African gold commerce. Their innovative financial instruments helped fund colonial expansion. However, their small domestic economy limited their currency's dominance, and Spain soon overtook them. 1,530 to 1,640 Spanish real de ocho, pieces of 8. These silver coins, literally cut into 8 pieces for smaller transactions, became the world's first truly global currency. Minted from South American silver mines, Spanish dollars circulated from Manila to Massachusetts. At their peak, they were so trusted that the newly independent United States used them as legal tender until 1857, and China accepted them until 1935. Their decline followed Spain's imperial overextension and mounting debts from endless European wars. 1,640 to 1,720 Dutch guilder. The Netherlands, despite its small size, created the world's most sophisticated financial system, including the first modern stock exchange, 1602, and central bank, 1609. The guilder's stability made Amsterdam the financial capital of Europe. The Dutch pioneered many modern banking practices, but eventually their limited territorial footprint couldn't compete with larger empires. 1720 to 1815. French livre, Cho franc. France's continental dominance briefly elevated its currency, particularly during Napoleon's reign when French financial influence spread across Europe. However, the monetary chaos following the French Revolution, remember our earlier chapter on assignats, and Napoleon's ultimate defeat prevented the franc from achieving long-term reserve status. 1815 to 1920. British pound sterling. For over a century, the pound reigned supreme. At its peak in the 1880s, over 60% of world trade was invoiced in sterling, and 30 to 40% of foreign exchange reserves were held in pounds. The Bank of England's strict adherence to the gold standard, £1 equals 123.27 grains of gold, created unprecedented monetary stability. The phrase solid as the pound entered the lexicon. Britain's decline began with the financial strain of World War I, which forced it to abandon the gold standard temporarily. 1920 to present, US dollar. America's economic emergence from World War I and Europe's devastation after World War II cemented dollar dominance. The 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement formally established the dollar as the world's reserve currency, with other currencies pegged to the dollar, which was itself convertible to gold at $35 per ounce. Though Nixon ended gold convertibility in 1971, the Nixon shock, the dollar's reserve status continued based on America's economic might, military power, and the network effects of existing dollar-based systems. The 7 stages of reserve currency decline. Historically, reserve currencies follow a predictable life cycle. Military rise. The country builds formidable military power: Portuguese explorers, Spanish conquistadors, British Navy, American armed forces. Economic dominance. Their economy becomes the world's largest through productivity, innovation, and trade. Dutch financial innovations, British Industrial Revolution, American technological leadership. Currency stability. The currency gains international trust through convertibility to precious metals and fiscal discipline. Spanish silver standard, British gold standard, Bretton Woods system. Financial sophistication. The country develops advanced banking, finance, and insurance services. Dutch Stock Exchange, London Financial District, Wall Street. Imperial overextension. Military commitments expand beyond sustainable levels, straining finances. Spanish-European wars, British colonial policing, American global military presence. Debt explosion. Budget deficits grow, initially financed by currency's exorbitant privilege. American post-1971 deficits, British post-World War I debt. Currency debasement. Unable to maintain fiscal discipline, the issuer prints money, undermining international confidence. Spanish inflationary minting, British post-gold standard policies, American post-2008 quantitative easing. This cycle typically unfolds over about a century, remarkably consistent from the 1400s through today. The transition periods between dominant currencies have historically featured financial instability, currency volatility, and geopolitical realignment, suggesting any future shift from dollar dominance would involve similar disruptions. Where are we now? The dollar's reserve status has shown remarkable resilience despite challenges. As of 2023, approximately 58% of global foreign exchange reserves were still held in dollars, down from 70% in 2000. Roughly 88% of international transactions involve dollars on at least one side of the trade. However, warning signs of potential long-term decline align with historical patterns. Imperial overextension U.S. military spending exceeds the next 9 countries combined. Exploding debt. U.S. debt to GDP ratio, over 120%, up from 35% in 1980. Currency debasement. Money supply expansion of 40% during the 2020 to 2021 pandemic alone. Based on historical cycles, we're arguably in the late stages of dollar reserve status, though transitions typically unfold over decades, not years. The question isn't if the dollar will eventually lose its dominant position, but when and what might replace it. The Bitcoin alternative. Bitcoin represents something entirely new in this historical progression, the first potential non-state reserve asset. Unlike previous reserve currencies, Bitcoin isn't issued by any government, can't be printed to finance wars or deficits, and doesn't require trust in any particular nation's fiscal discipline. While Bitcoin remains too volatile and limited in adoption to threaten the dollar's position currently, it offers an intriguing alternative to the historical pattern of one nation-state currency replacing another. As traditional reserve currencies have an average lifespan of about 100 years, we're statistically approaching the dollar's expected sunset, making Bitcoin's emergence particularly timely. Next, we'll examine the world's current reserve currency and ask a troubling question. Is the US dollar following the same path to debasement as its historical predecessors? Chapter 29. The US dollar. Money printer go brr. After exploring history's greatest monetary disasters, we've reached the reigning champion, the US dollar. While it hasn't experienced the spectacular hyperinflation of Zimbabwe or Venezuela, it's following the same slow-motion script that all reserve currencies eventually face. The question isn't if the dollar will follow the same path, but why it's taking so much longer. From gold-backed to government promise. The dollar's modern journey began in 1913 with the Federal Reserve's creation. Initially requiring 40% gold backing, the dollar remained remarkably stable until the 1930s. When President Roosevelt confiscated private gold and devalued the dollar by 41% overnight. The real watershed moment came in 1971, when President Nixon ended gold convertibility entirely. Treasury Secretary John Connolly bluntly told concerned foreign ministers, "The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem." This shift to a pure fiat currency removed the final constraint on money creation, and the results were predictable. The dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power since then. After the 2008 financial crisis, money printing accelerated to previously unimaginable levels. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $870 billion in 2007 to $8.9 trillion by 2022, a tenfold increase in just 15 years. Even more shocking, approximately 40% of all US dollars in existence were created during 2020 to 2021 alone. That's like a 244-year-old family business producing 40% of its lifetime output during a single lunch break. America's money magic trick. So why hasn't the dollar collapsed like the Pengo or Bolivar? Unlike previous empires that debased their currencies, America has created a sophisticated three-headed money machine that diffuses and delays the effects. The Federal Reserve creates base money while appearing independent. Commercial banks multiply this money through fractional reserve lending. The Treasury, government, issues bonds that the Fed can purchase with newly created dollars. This system creates both distance and delay between money creation and inflation. When Roman emperors debased their silver coins, citizens felt it immediately. When the Fed expands the money supply, the impact filters through multiple institutions and global markets before reaching everyday Americans. Why America can print when others can't. The most remarkable aspect of the dollar is that America can get away with monetary policies that would destroy any other currency. When Turkey or Argentina prints money, their currencies collapse within months. America has run up $35 trillion in debt while printing trillions more, yet maintains global trust. Why? It's because the dollar isn't just America's currency, it's the world's operating system. About 60% of global reserves are held in dollars. Oil and most commodities are priced in dollars. International trade predominantly settles in dollars. The US borrows in its own currency, unlike most nations. This creates a unique, exorbitant privilege where America can export inflation abroad. When the Fed creates new dollars, a significant portion gets absorbed by global demand, rather than immediately driving up domestic prices, essentially giving the US a release valve for inflationary pressure that other countries lack. Even the US government debt market is in a league of its own, with over $500 billion changing hands daily. This means America can borrow enormous sums without disrupting markets, while smaller economies get rocked by even minor investor nervousness. Consider the stark difference. When developing countries need to borrow, they often must do so in dollars, creating a currency trap where any devaluation makes their debts more expensive. Meanwhile, if the dollar loses value, America's debt burden effectively decreases, a luxury only the issuer of the world's reserve currency enjoys. The stablecoin paradox. In a fascinating twist, the newest buffer supporting the dollar comes from an unexpected source: cryptocurrency stablecoins. These digital tokens, backed by actual dollars held in reserve, have created unprecedented new demand for US currency. USDT, Tether, USDC, and others collectively represent over $150 billion in dollar demand that didn't exist a decade ago. This crypto-dollar hybrid creates an ironic situation where the technology most threatening to traditional currency is temporarily strengthening the very system it may eventually replace. Following the classic pattern. Despite these advantages, the dollar is following the same historical pattern as previous reserve currencies. Military rise checkmark. Achieved post-World War II. Economic dominance checkmark by the 1950s. Currency stability checkmark, through Bretton Woods. Financial sophistication checkmark, Wall Street's dominance. Imperial overextension checkmark, military bases in 80-plus countries. Debt explosion, debt/GDP from 35% in 1980 to 120% plus today. Currency debasement, we are here. The difference isn't in the direction, but in the velocity. America's monetary system and global reserve status haven't prevented debasement. They've simply stretched the historical timeline, turning what might have been a decades-long decline into a century-long process. The Bitcoin circuit breaker. Bitcoin offers a potential escape from this historical cycle of currency debasement. Unlike the dollar, Bitcoin's supply is mathematically capped at 21 million coins, making it immune to the political pressures that have degraded every major currency throughout history. While Bitcoin remains too volatile and limited in adoption to replace the dollar currently, it provides the first viable alternative to the pattern of one nation-state currency replacing another. For those concerned about the dollar's long-term trajectory, Bitcoin represents a potential hedge against the seemingly inevitable declining purchasing power that has characterized all fiat currencies. Next, in our final chapter, we'll explore how Bitcoin might break this historical cycle of monetary debasement, potentially becoming the first truly global, non-state monetary system in human history. Chapter 30. Bitcoin. Breaking the historical cycle? After 29 chapters of monetary disasters spanning 2,000 years and 6 continents, you might be feeling a bit depressed about humanity's financial future. If emperors, dictators, democratically elected officials, and PhD economists all eventually succumb to the temptation to debase currency, what hope do we have? Enter Bitcoin, the first attempt to create money that can't be screwed up by human weakness, political expediency, or printing presses. The Genesis block, money without masters. On January 3, 2009, as the global financial system teetered on the edge of collapse, an anonymous developer using the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto launched Bitcoin by mining the Genesis block. Embedded within this first block was a message that revealed Bitcoin's purpose: Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. A headline from that day's Times of London highlighting the ongoing financial crisis. This wasn't just another digital payment system. It was a direct response to the fundamental problem we've seen throughout this book. When humans control money, they eventually destroy it. Nakamoto's innovation wasn't primarily technological. It was governance. Bitcoin created the first monetary system with rules but no rulers. The core innovation can be summarized in 3 revolutionary characteristics. Fixed supply. Cap: only 21 million Bitcoins will ever exist, with the final fraction mined around 2,140. Predetermined issuance schedule. New Bitcoins are created at a mathematically precise rate that halves every 4 years. Decentralized verification. No central authority can change the rules without overwhelming consensus. These characteristics address the fatal flaw we've seen in every currency collapse: the ability of authorities to create money at will. Roman emperors mixed copper into silver coins. Weimar Germany fired up the printing presses. Zimbabwe added zeros to banknotes. The mechanism changes, but the outcome remains the same: currency debasement when those in power face sufficient pressure. The Immaculate Conception. Unlike every previous form of money, Bitcoin was launched with remarkable fairness. There was no pre-mine for the creator, no privileged access for the wealthy or connected, no government mandate forcing adoption. Bitcoin began with the quiet publication of a 9-page white paper and an open-source software release. When Nakamoto disappeared in 2011, never to be heard from again, Bitcoin achieved something unprecedented: a monetary system with no identifiable leader to corrupt, threaten, or compromise. This Immaculate Conception stands in stark contrast to previous currencies, which were always tied to the fortunes and decisions of their issuing authorities. The contrasts with fiat money are striking. While central banks can create infinite currency units, Bitcoin's supply is mathematically capped. While government budgets can be expanded through borrowing, Bitcoin has no debt mechanism. While monetary policy changes with new political administrations, Bitcoin's issuance schedule remains fixed regardless of economic conditions. While dollars, euros, and yen can be created with keystrokes, each new Bitcoin requires substantial energy expenditure through mining. From digital curiosity to monetary phenomenon, Bitcoin's evolution has been remarkable by any standard. January 2009. Bitcoin launches with no market value. May 2010. First commercial transaction, 10,000 BTC for 2 pizzas, valuing Bitcoin at $0.003. February 2011. Bitcoin reaches parity with US dollar $1. November 2013. First major price spike, $1,100. December 2017. Mainstream awareness spike, $19,000. November 2021. All-time high. To date, $69,000. March 2024. Surpassed $1 trillion market capitalization. January 2025. Bitcoin reached a psychological number, $100,000. This growth wasn't just in price but also in infrastructure, security, and adoption. The network has processed over 800 million transactions without a single moment of downtime. Mining security hash rate has increased from Nakamoto's single laptop to a global industry consuming more electricity than medium-sized countries. Development continues through a distributed, open-source process with hundreds of contributors worldwide. Most importantly, Bitcoin has begun fulfilling its purpose as a monetary lifeline in precisely the places experiencing currency collapse. In Venezuela, Bitcoin mining became a path to financial survival when the Bolivar collapsed. In Lebanon, Bitcoin provided a way to bypass banking restrictions during the financial crisis. In Turkey, cryptocurrency adoption surged as Erdogan's monetary policies decimated the lira. In Nigeria, young people embraced Bitcoin when the naira lost credibility. In Argentina, Bitcoin offers escape from recurring peso devaluations. The ultimate test, nation-state adoption. The most significant development in Bitcoin's evolution came on September 7, 2021, when El Salvador became the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender alongside the US dollar. This small Central American nation of 6.5 million people became a real-time experiment in national Bitcoin adoption. The results have been mixed, but instructive. Government implementation faced significant challenges, but Bitcoin provided several benefits. Remittance costs, crucial for the 20% of GDP sent by Salvadorans abroad, decreased substantially. Previously unbanked citizens gained financial access through the government's digital wallet. International tourism increased by 95% in the first year after adoption. Foreign investment in the previously overlooked country surged. What makes El Salvador's experiment particularly relevant is that it began during a Bitcoin bear market, when the price fell from $69,000 to below $20,000. Yet the program continued. This suggests that Bitcoin's utility extends beyond speculative investment to practical monetary functions. The challenges ahead. Despite its revolutionary potential, Bitcoin faces significant hurdles to broader adoption. Volatility. Bitcoin's price swings make short-term use as currency challenging. Scaling limitations. The base layer processes only approximately 7 transactions per second, though Layer 2 solutions like Lightning Network address this. Energy consumption. Bitcoin mining consumes substantial electricity, though increasingly from renewable sources. Regulatory uncertainty. Governments uncomfortable with monetary competition may restrict access. Technical complexity. Using Bitcoin securely still requires technical knowledge beyond many users. These challenges are substantial but arguably less insurmountable than affixing the fundamental governance problems of fiat currencies outlined in the previous 29 chapters. Technical problems tend to find technical solutions. Governance problems, as history shows, tend to repeat across centuries and cultures. Breaking the historical cycle. Throughout this book, we've witnessed the same monetary tragedy play out repeatedly across time and geography. The names and specific circumstances change, but the fundamental pattern remains consistent. Currencies start strong, then governments face pressure, financial discipline weakens, money printing accelerates, and purchasing power collapses. Bitcoin represents the first credible attempt to break this cycle by removing the critical vulnerability: human discretion over money supply. By replacing trust in institutions with trust in mathematics, Bitcoin offers something unique in monetary history: a system where the rules cannot be changed by political expediency, military necessity, or financial panic. Whether Bitcoin ultimately succeeds in becoming global money, a store of value alongside traditional currencies, or simply a provocative experiment, it has already achieved something remarkable, demonstrating that an alternative monetary system is possible. After thousands of years of currency debasements, hyperinflations, and financial collapses, Bitcoin challenges us to imagine a world where money itself might be removed from political control, where emperors, presidents, and central bankers alike would need to live within their means, rather than debasing the currency to fund their ambitions. As you finish your bathroom break and return to the world of depreciating fiat currencies, remember, for the first time in human history, you have a choice. Your savings don't have to go down the same toilet as the Roman denarius, German mark, Zimbabwean dollar, or Venezuelan bolivar. Whether Bitcoin proves to be the ultimate solution or just the first step toward better money, it represents something profound: humanity's first serious attempt to break the historical cycle of monetary collapse that has persisted since coins were first minted thousands of years ago. Next time you hear a central banker talk about unlimited liquidity or quantitative easing, remember the lessons of history, and perhaps consider exchanging at least some of your government currency for the only money with a supply that no government, bank, or institution can expand at will. Final flush, the end of the pipeline. So here we are. You've sat, read, chuckled, maybe even cried, or at least winced, at the parade of currencies flushed down history's drain. From Roman emperors to modern money magicians, the script hasn't changed much. Print more, lie more, inflate more, collapse. Governments promise stability, then secretly light your savings on fire. They call it stimulus or monetary policy. We call it a scam dressed in a suit. But now, for the first time, there's a way out. Bitcoin isn't perfect. It won't fix your diet, your dating life, or your dad issues. But it gives you an exit from the rigged game. A monetary system that doesn't depend on trust, political promises, or creative accounting. So go ahead, stand up, flush the fiat, gently, please. Plumbing isn't immune to inflation either, and take back control. Because the future of money should belong to math, not middlemen. End of flush the fiat.